At 6:30 in the morning on September 22, 2025, U.S. surveillance systems registered a new contact in the Caribbean Sea. On radar screens, analysts watched as a Venezuelan speedboat raced across open water at full throttle. Twin outboard engines pushed the craft to its maximum, carving white streaks into the surface. On board were armed men, convinced they were running another smuggling trip. Routine, fast, and profitable. What they did not realize was that the ocean around them was no longer open. From the moment their engines roared to life, they had stepped into a carefully prepared surveillance and targeting network designed to make escape impossible. What looked like freedom was already a trap. High above, American satellites tracked their heat signature, following the boat's exhaust plume as if it were a glowing arrow across the sea. Every shift in heading, every burst of throttle was monitored and logged in real time by analysts thousands of miles away. At 25,000 feet, a U.S. Navy P-8A, Poseidon Maritime Patrol aircraft circled silently. Its AN/APY-10 radar swept vast distances, detecting and updating the position of even small vessels. The Poseidon's crew didn't just plot the speedboat's track, they also intercepted its radio traffic. Every transmission back to Caracas, including encrypted bursts, was captured and archived. The smugglers assumed their communications were secure. In reality, they were being recorded, analyzed, and fed into the Navy's combat data web before their messages even finished sending. On the horizon, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer closed the distance. To the smugglers, it was invisible, just a faint silhouette. But to the Navy, the vessel's fate was already sealed. The destroyer represented far more than firepower. At 9,000 tons, it carried sensors, radar systems, and weapons capable of dominating the battle space. By the end of that day, the speedboat would be destroyed. Caracas would call it an act of war. Washington would label it a counter-narcotics operation. And the world would watch the incident escalate from a smuggling interdiction to an international crisis. The Venezuelan crew never had a chance. From the first moment they throttled forward, they had entered what the U.S. military calls a killbox. The term is not dramatic rhetoric, it's doctrinal. A killbox is an area in which surveillance assets, firepower, and targeting data overlap to ensure that a target cannot escape. Once a contact enters such a zone, its eventual destruction is not a question of if, but when. The kill chain began with satellites. Beyond imaging, they tracked thermal signatures, electronic emissions, and even faint hydrocarbon traces in the boat's exhaust trail. Each piece of data added another layer of certainty. The speedboat's maximum speed of around 50 knots was irrelevant in a battle space where information moved at the speed of light. The Poseidon represented the next layer. Far from just a reconnaissance aircraft, it acted as an airborne command post. Its sensors could detect vessels the size of a small skiff across hundreds of miles. Whenever the smugglers changed course, the Poseidon shadowed them, maintaining contact at all times. Its passive electronic surveillance systems vacuumed up every transmission, from simple voice calls to encrypted data bursts, tagging them for intelligence databases. On the surface, the Arleigh Burke-class destroyer maneuvered into position. Its weapons suite included 96 vertical launch cells capable of firing everything from Tomahawk land attack missiles to SM-series surface-to-air interceptors. Against a fiberglass speedboat, such an arsenal was excessive, but the destroyer's real contribution was its role inside the Navy's Aegis combat system. Its SPY-1 radar fed positional data into a shared network that linked ships, aircraft, and command centers into a common operational picture. This was what surrounded truly meant. Not a visible ring of ships on the horizon, but an invisible web of sensors, radars, and fire control solutions that ensured the boat's destruction was certain. No matter which direction the smugglers chose, north, south, or west toward Venezuelan waters, their course was already plotted, their options eliminated. When the order came, there was no high-speed chase, no shouted warnings. The Poseidon transmitted final target confirmation. The destroyer's Combat Information Center acknowledged. Fire control systems aligned, and a precision strike obliterated the speedboat in seconds. The fiberglass hull was reduced to burning wreckage. For the Navy, the operation was a textbook success. For the smugglers, there had never been a realistic chance of escape. Within hours, the Pentagon confirmed the mission. The official statement emphasized counter-narcotics enforcement. According to Washington, the destroyed vessel was tied directly to Tren de Aragua, Venezuela's most powerful criminal syndicate. Intelligence indicated the boat carried narcotics and cartel operatives preparing for regional distribution. 11 suspected operatives were reported killed. President Donald Trump highlighted the incident publicly, stating the strike demonstrated America's resolve to target cartel-linked operatives anywhere they operated. In Caracas, the response was immediate. President Nicolás Maduro condemned the destruction as an act of aggression and a violation of sovereignty. He argued the men on board were Venezuelan citizens killed without due process, and that their deaths represented a breach of international law. The debate quickly expanded beyond narcotics enforcement. Analysts pointed out the precedent. If major powers began sinking vessels in international waters based solely on suspicion, global shipping lanes could become de facto free-fire zones. Allies remained cautious, issuing no public support. But in defense circles, concerns about escalation grew. For the Pentagon, however, the real value of the operation extended beyond eliminating one speedboat. Each smuggling run is a live intelligence opportunity, and this one provided significant data. The Navy had recorded every communication between the smugglers and handlers in Venezuela, including voices, frequencies, and transmission patterns. Routes, fuel stops, and equipment carried were also logged. All of this information was stored for future analysis. This approach, known as pattern of life intelligence, allows analysts to build predictive models. How do smugglers react under surveillance? Do they sprint toward territorial waters or attempt to blend with commercial traffic? Which frequencies do they favor for encrypted bursts? Each answer improves the Navy's ability to interdict future operations. The method extends beyond narcotics. When Venezuelan F-16s later conducted aggressive low passes over the USS Jason Dunham, U.S. destroyers logged radar signatures and radio traffic, turning a provocation into a valuable data set. When Chinese Z-10 helicopters harassed patrols in the South China Sea, their electronic fingerprints were archived. Even Houthi militants in the Red Sea, firing shoulder-launched missiles, inadvertently revealed infrared plume characteristics of their systems. Each encounter, no matter how hostile, became an intelligence harvest. The September 2nd incident triggered direct political fallout. Within hours, Maduro appeared on Venezuelan state television, denouncing the strike as murder. He framed the event as a violation of sovereignty and pledged retaliation. For a population facing sanctions and economic crisis, the narrative fueled nationalist sentiment. Maduro placed the Venezuelan armed forces on alert. State media broadcast images of aging F-16s powering up on deteriorating airstrips and coastal troops conducting marches. For domestic audiences, the optics suggested defiance. In reality, Venezuela's air force suffered from shortages of parts and maintenance, and its naval forces were incapable of matching the U.S. fleet offshore. Caracas could not confront the U.S. head-on, but it could attempt provocations. 3 days later, that provocation arrived. 2 Venezuelan F-16 conducted a low-altitude flyby of the USS Jason Dunham in international waters. Pentagon officials labeled the maneuver reckless and provocative. Sailors on deck reported shockwaves from the jets rippling across the sea surface. To Venezuelan audiences, the flyby was presented as defiance. To the U.S. Navy, it was an intelligence opportunity. Radar signatures, radio transmissions, and tactics were all recorded, strengthening future U.S. capabilities. But the risk of escalation was real. U.S. Navy rules of engagement directed ships to hold fire unless directly threatened. Yet supersonic aircraft can close the distance in seconds, and the line between provocation and attack is thin. A misinterpreted radar lock or accidental missile launch could have triggered open conflict. Washington's response was not limited to statements. Within a week, 10 F-35 Lightning II stealth fighters were deployed to Puerto Rico. Unlike Venezuela's 1980s-era F-16s, the F-35s represent fifth-generation technology, equipped to penetrate defenses and neutralize threats before adversaries even register their presence. The message was clear. The U.S. was prepared to escalate. Regional governments, from Colombia to the Lesser Antilles, expressed unease as American warships and aircraft increased patrols. Shipping companies diverted traffic to avoid risk. Diplomats warned that what began as a counter-narcotics interdiction had rapidly evolved into a geopolitical flashpoint. By the end of the first week of September 2025, the Caribbean outwardly appeared calm. Merchant ships continued routine traffic. Waves rolled across blue waters. But beneath the surface, the balance of power had shifted. A single speedboat, operated by smugglers who assumed impunity, had triggered an incident pulling Venezuela and the United States into direct confrontation. For the smugglers, the sea represented freedom. For the Navy, it was a controlled environment, a networked battle space where satellites, patrol aircraft, and destroyers operated seamlessly. Modern warfare does not depend on warning shots or drawn-out chases. It relies on precision networks where escape is structurally impossible. The destroyed speedboat was more than a smuggling vessel. It was a signal, a test, and ultimately a trigger. For Caracas, the incident became both humiliation and propaganda, fueling speeches and television broadcasts. For Washington, it reinforced the Navy's role as both an enforcer and an intelligence collector. And for the watching world, it highlighted a dangerous precedent. The line between counter-narcotics enforcement and state-level confrontation had blurred in a single morning on the Caribbean Sea. So, what do you think? Did Washington's decision to strike a smuggler's boat tied to cartel operations demonstrate necessary resolve, or did it risk escalation far beyond the original target? Share your view in the comments. Don't forget to like this video if you found the breakdown informative, and subscribe so you don't miss the next analysis. If you want to support the channel directly, consider joining our community. It helps us keep producing in-depth coverage of critical military events worldwide. Because as this incident shows, when you gamble against the US Navy, escape is never an option.